Hello friends, we're here for an experiment today on weathering and erosion. Now I know we've already gone through the steps of the experiment and I know you might have some questions, so I'm going to start out with the materials that I used today. First of all of my science materials are in school where I was not when I recorded this video. So I had to use materials from around my house like many of you had to do if you were trying this experiment. So as far as sandstone goes, I don't actually know if the stones that I used were sandstone, but I did find some softer rocks that were able to demonstrate weathering and erosion. I did use a paper towel in a jar with a lid. Unfortunately, my jar kind of had some grooves on the outside, which made it a little difficult to see. I did use water. However, the hand lens that was the magnifying glass I did not have at home with me, so you'll notice in the videos you didn't see those. And I also didn't have the stopwatch, but I used the timer on my phone instead. So these are ways that you could improvise if you were doing this experiment on your own. So let's discuss step one. In step one, you were supposed to predict what would happen if you rubbed the two pieces of sandstone together, and then we actually did it. Hopefully, you were able to see that when I rubbed the two stones together, sediment came off of the stones and onto the board on my table. That was supposed to mimic weathering, because just like when wind blows rocks against other rocks, pieces can rub off or break off, and that would be weathering. Next step, for step two, I put the pieces of sandstone or whatever rocks I had in the jar, and I poured the water in. And then we were supposed to observe at that point that the water was very clear and that you could clearly see the rocks at the bottom of the jar. That was not supposed to mimic anything, but just to show you what the jar looked like before we did anything to it. In step three, I did shake the jar for 3 minutes. It was tough, my arms hurt, but I did do it. At the end, I showed you the jar. Okay, you were supposed to make a prediction about what you thought was going to happen, and whatever you predicted was fine, and then we actually did it. Again, we did not have the magnifying glass, and I know it was really tough to see when I was trying to show you the jar, but as I mentioned in the video, you should have noticed, or you would have noticed, could you have seen it correctly, that the water in the jar was very cloudy, and that sediment had gone to the bottom of the jar. Now this step was supposed to mimic two different things. It was supposed to mimic weathering and erosion. When I shook the jar and the rocks bounced off the sides of the jar, that was supposed to mimic weathering. Because again, when rocks slam into things, pieces can break off. So that was supposed to be weathering. When the sediment was floating in the jar and the water was taking it to the bottom of the jar, that was supposed to mimic erosion because the water was carrying the sediment where it was going to stop. I know it didn't ask you, but when the sediment gathered at the bottom of the jar, that actually would have been deposition. Okay? So again, the rocks bouncing off the sides of the jar and losing some pieces there of sediment was weathering. The water carrying the sediment to the bottom of the jar was erosion. And even though I won't ask you about this, the fact that the sediment did stop and deposit at the bottom of the jar would be deposition. Okay? So a couple things you might want to notice here. I'm going to ask you to compare your predictions with what actually happened. And remember, your predictions don't have to be correct. A prediction is just that, a prediction. Scientists make predictions all the time that are not correct, that do not come true. It's okay if your prediction was wrong. But for wrap it up question number one, I am going to ask you to compare your observations and your predictions. If you found that your predictions matched your observations, then you would say my predictions match my observations because I predicted that this would happen and this is what happened. So for instance, for the first step, if you predicted that when we rubbed the stones together, pieces would come off, that's what happened. So your prediction did come true. If you predicted that nothing would happen, your prediction did not match the observations because you should have observed that sediment did come off. Okay? And you're going to do that for the different steps that we did and the different predictions that you made. And again, it is totally okay that your predictions did not match. Just tell us what you predicted and either how that came true or how it did not come true, what happened instead. Okay? And for our other wrap it up question, I'm going to ask you what processes were modeled. And if you listen to this video, I've already given you the answers to those questions. Okay? So if you need to, go back and listen to this again. Hopefully you enjoyed this experiment. Maybe you were even able to do it. And if not, we will continue to talk about different ways that the earth can be changed. It won't specifically be about water and wind, but they will talk about weathering and erosion. So hopefully we'll find other ways that you can understand the different ways that Earth's surface is changed. Have a great day, everyone.